Going live early. People can hear us. Do 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 do. Well, I guess I should probably get back here so I can hit some buttons. All right. People realize the pre-show is really, really boring because it's you and me looking at a clock. Yeah.
Well, we're also trying not to talk because that's the whole point, Tim. Trying to keep it
It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
We're back again. One more week, one more Dev Friday show. I actually have a topic, but the problem is when I have a topic, Mark, I forget anything interesting to say during this part where we're welcoming people to the show that they're watching. So
because you're just consumed with this idea that you just want to talk about, right?
Yeah. Something's gotta give there. But no, actually, one of my kids just before I got on here, we got the older. I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago or something like that. The older kids for school got some Surface. What is it? Surface Goes, right? So the still it's not the laptops, but it's the normal Surface with the type cover and all that kind of stuff. But they got some Surface Goes for school, and they used to have Chromebooks. And I think how old is Clara? 4. So my 4-year-old's there going, can I have their old computer? Like, so she wants like the 14-year-old's old computer, right? And I'm like, I don't think so, but it makes me think. We got some old Chromebooks. Now, let's be honest here. Those Chromebooks are more than a few years old, and they may have been dropped once or twice. So there's some dings, there's some dents. The lid may not close all the way, type of things. But I was just wondering the other day about it. Is there some type of kiosk-like app for a Chromebook that would run, like a kid's app, where if we plugged it, not give them that keyboard because it's a touch screen, it's all that kind of stuff. But like if you plug it into an HDMI cable and put it on a big TV and then throw a USB keyboard in it, it's like you could at least press buttons and like press a key and see something on the screen. I wonder if there's got to be some like kid app to turn your Chromebook into like a interactive thing for kids to feel comfortable with keyboards and stuff like that.
There has to be, but also, if that doesn't exist, is there some way to set up like Pop OS with like their default kind of icon desktop view, like the men, like they have the view where you can bring up just the grid of icons, like really large icons. There's some way you could just kind of default to that and kind of lock them into that view. I'm sure you could probably hack away at Linux and probably figure that out, Tim.
Oh, I'm sure if we did it, yeah. If we ran a different operating system other than Chrome, I'm looking for the simplest solution because I don't need yet another thing that would be cool if I could one day find the time to do. You know what I'm saying?
Because that's the point of the show, just to give us both new project ideas that we'll never work on.
I think that is one of the things. Yeah, that is one of the things. But maybe, I mean, who knows? I still we talked about the book last week, right? Like they're 2 weeks ago now. Maybe I'll
the AI generated kids book, right?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to use an AI generated. We'll see. So you in spring break now?
Idea. Yeah, it's been a great week. It's been spring break, and Tim, it's been like a developer vacation for me.
Yeah,
I've been
just writing code.
I've been
stuff.
coding away. I've been tweaking my setup like I always do, and I actually have time for it. And getting back.
Oh right. Oh, why did I
getting back? Coming home, Tim. Coming home.
Why did I do it?
Coming back to the Vim.
Yeah.
Through the Tmux.
So you're running.
Tim,
Windows
it feels so good.
Boot into PowerShell.
Yeah, exactly. That's like I just discovered the fact that you could start up PowerShell as a startup option and go full screen. And remember we talked about a couple of weeks ago, like wouldn't it be great if I could just boot right into a terminal, right? I just want to have a nice looking terminal and just code from there. And because life was simple back in the days, I was also starting this week. I was thinking about when was I the most happiest programming? At points in my life.
And
when I was like, I was engaged, I was fascinated, I was programming it was just like butter. My fingers were just like moving like crazy, right?
Now, did you ever do the Commodore thing where, like the Commodore 64 thing, where you got a computer and then there was like, I remember a friend had one of these, and there was no programs on it. There was a book of programs, and you would flip to it, and you would painstakingly type in the code that was on the page, and then tell it to execute it, and then you'd be like, "Oh, look, it's a game."
I never had a Commodore, but I did have a TRS-80.
Okay.
Used that and also evolved from the TRS-80 to a Tandy.
Okay.
But the TSR-80 was pretty much a terminal interface,
Right,
in a sense,
right.
where if you really wanted to do anything or practical, you had to either write your own programs or to start programs that were there to give you some type of graphical interface.
Yeah.
that would be displayed there. But that's where I come from.
I'm pretty sure my first computer was an Apple IIc Plus, and I think it was similar, if I remember.
Look at you,
There
Tim,
was some
starting
type-
on the Apple platform. Look
I know,
at
right?
you.
Right.
Look
When
how
you're-
far you've
when
come
you're
from that.
exposed to it young, you realize how restrictive of a thing it is, and then you just long for freedom. That's what it is.
That's right. That's right.
Now, when you're older and someone kind of tells you that it's the cool thing to do, you buy into that notion, and you're like, "Oh yeah, this ecosystem is safer," or something like that. I don't know, but those of us who had to endure it as a child and go to computer stores where there's all these options of software, and say to your father, "Can I have that, Dad?" and he'd say, "No, it's not for Apple. We can only get that from the Apple store, and there's not one near us, Tim. So you'll never have an application again." You had to endure that. Then you're like, no, I want freedom, and freedom comes from, well, not being locked in an ecosystem like Apple. So
what I remember from the early days of playing with an Apple or Mac computer, because I'd never had one, but I had friends and coworkers who did. So I was kind of like, you just kind of seeing their setup. And one thing I remember, it just always felt slow to me when I would sit down at the computer and try to just play with it and just, navigate around, compared to even like Windows 3.1, which I guess that's what I'm comparing it to. It just felt slow and kind of clunky. I would just remember like the hard drive just crunching away if I'd be like sliding the window from like one place to the next. It just felt like a slow interface to me, which was kind of interesting to think about. Well, what is the, once you got used to Windows or Windows 3.1 and, that operating system, and then playing with the Mac, I'm like, well, what's the point?
There's Windows 3.1 and there's Windows, remember 3.11? Like the slightly better version?
Yeah. I was on it all the way up to Windows Me.
I'm trying to think what was in between that. There's Windows for Workgroups once. I forget what that was. Oh, those versions. Anyway, so basically you've turned your computer into DOS though.
That's where I've got to. So once I discovered I could turn on.
And are you running a full Linux desktop now?
No, well, I was tempted to go back to it once I got back to Vim and Tmux. Yes, so I'm using.
You can install Linux on Windows or something.
No, well, it's with the WSL.
Yeah,
the Windows subsystem for Linux, right?
But you can run like a full install of
Ubuntu. Yes. So what my setup is, I have it Windows terminal configured. So when I start up my computer, that's one of the startup applications. It opens up full screen, so it just takes over everything. So that's all I see. And then what I do is I have it default to going into the Ubuntu WSL terminal session. So it goes right into that. And then also I have it set to automatically go right into Tmux. So it kind of flows right into my kind of a setup, and I could start Vim from there. We're actually using NeoVim, which I discovered that this week. I was like, whoa, heard about this NeoVim, and I was like, it's pretty hot on YouTube right now. I thought I'd check it out, and yeah, that's a really great experience too.
What is Neo? I shouldn't ask. I'm sorry. What is NeoVim?
Well, NeoVim is like I said, I'm new to it too, because I come traditionally from the Vim, but I was looking for, what is a kind of if I'm going to be kind of restarting with Vim, because I've been using Vim emulation on all my editors. Like if I use, what is it? My VS Code, or if I use any of the JetBrains products or applications, that I always have the Vim emulation mode turned on. But I was like, if I'm going to go back to and use it strictly from the terminal, what should be the setup? So I was kind of looking at how people are setting up their development environments with Tmux and with Vim, and they're doing it with NeoVim now, which is I wouldn't say I guess you could consider it a fork. It's a fork of Vim, but it's basically a rewrite of Vim. So basically it's trying to recreate all of its functionality, but then have better presets, better defaults. And also it's based around the Lua programming language. Okay. So that developers really like it because it's more flexible in how you can configure Vim now, compared to you had to use either was a Vim script or just the Vim initialization files. And it was just, it worked, but it just felt like a little bit of a kind of a clunky experience. I think it's programmers, which I never really got into the Vim script or the Vim programming language. That that Vim had inside of it. But the Lua is actually it's pretty nice, kind of simple programming language. You can use it to basically program your configuration of Vim.
Gotcha. And what are you coding now? You got it all set up, because here's the thing. Here's the thing that developers are really good at. And I'll say that it's not just developers. It's, I don't know, maybe it's that kind of technical creative mind. It's, I've got it all set up, I'm ready to go. And it's like, what'd you do? No, it's set up. And it's like, what have you printed on your 3D printer? What have I printed on my 3D printer? What do you mean, what have I printed on my 3D printer? I've printed all these modifications for my 3D printer on my 3D printer. It's like, well, what have you printed on your 3D printer? I've made my 3D printer better with my 3D printer. But have you printed something? So what are you doing with this setup, Mark?
Okay. Well, the first thing I did was, we talked about previously that I'm going to be using, it's a season of me thinking about what is the next step? What is the next chapter of my life? Where am I going?
So where's your career going to develop?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, and then I started making a list. Okay, these are the things that I need to do. One of the first things to do, I need to get my website back online. So that was actually one of the first things I did. I was like, all right, let me just get my website back online. And so I at least have something online about myself. So I did that. And I threw that up with Astro, the new hot static site builder.
What is this now? Astro?
Astro. So it's the new static website builder, because previously I was using Gatsby, and Gatsby going from like version, I started using version 3.
How long as a JavaScript framework has Gatsby been around? 2, 3, 4 months? It's way too old now, right?
I know it's out of date, it's out of fashion. The JavaScript developers, they just move on every year, just something different. But I was using Gatsby, and I was liking Gatsby. It was my first static website builder, and we talked about how the GraphQL, and that was my first introduction to that, and I thought it was great. I was like, wow, this is actually really, really cool. How it can basically take a data source in, or multiple data sources, and give me a data layer that I can then query and just do that directly within my JavaScript.
Pull it from Markdown and then turn it into
GraphQL. So it was a really great experience, and I liked that, but also kind of felt like really like a really huge kind of part, or not say a library, but like it's a really kind of substantial part of the actual process.
I mean, what you're describing is powerful, but at the same time, it's also like, well, that's a lot to ingest data into a GraphQL form and then expect you to query it in a GraphQL form.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, there's a lot going on there. It's a really cool thing, but do you need all of that utility?
So that was always kind of, the more I used it, I was like, oh, okay. It's because it took a lot of work, because it's interesting. Right. It's fascinating when you first get into it. Like, wow, this is a really cool interface. And especially it has the nice kind of GraphQL editor that you can spin up in your browser, and you can kind of just see the tree structure, and it's very, very visual. But then as you do more with it, I'm like, it kind of just feels like drudgery, just trying to navigate and kind of to work with it. And then since Gatsby, I don't know, they seem between like version 3 to 5, or they're on like what? I don't think the version 5 yet, but they're on like the late versions of their 4.0 kind of a development cycle. It just seems like they start breaking things like libraries, and just like the backwards compatibility was starting to be really, really clunky. And especially if I went to upgrade my website, it just was like, oh my God, it's gonna be a huge amount of work. And I hate when that happens. I hate when there's dependencies that when they start to there's updates on these libraries that I then want to update my application to support the framework or the system that I'm using, that it's just more work for me to maintain, because I have to go and make updates and make sure it's using the right libraries, and just hate that. So I was like looking around, saying, is there like another static website builder that actually is simpler to use? And I fell on Astro, which is really, really cool. It's a very simple kind of structure to use, especially if you still use Mark. It's kind of built around Markdown. You can use other data source too, but it doesn't have to do anything with GraphQL. It's built around Markdown. But the way that it takes the data from the Markdown files, it basically just gives you an object. Like you define like the type of the object. So if you have, let's say, Markdown files that are related to like a blog or journal, or Markdown articles that are related to even like products of the store, you set those up in your folder. Then you define a type. What is the type of the data that's coming from that Markdown? And then it just knows that. And then when it brings it in, it basically gives you an object that you can then just query. So
a lot simpler way to do it.
Yeah. So just kind of, starting with a very kind of, it also just seems faster too. Just the build cycle of when you need to build the website just seems like really fast. So that was the first thing I did, was to get my personal website back online, and I have plans for what I need to like write articles.
Was it gone, or was it just a placeholder? Like you said, back online, like was the site?
Well, I had I had pretty much, if you went to markcorbline.com, you saw markcorbline.com.
Okay. Okay.
You just
Fair
saw the
enough.
domain name.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Wasn't
So that's
anything on there. So that
not
was the
gonna lie.
first thing. And then also getting back to working on my site build. I finally know
Not a sponsor.
no, not a
Not a sponsor,
sponsor.
but sitebuild.io. Is that
Yeah,
what it
so
is?
that's my primary project I'm working on, and I finally figured out what I want to do with it. And it's still, I wanted to be a no code design tool for these types of systems I like to use, like let's say Next.js or Astro. Like if you're developing a project on that, having a visual way to basically design the theme
And you
and
want to
basically
go with
build
an
out
AI eventually, right?
eventually. But I was just thinking about from a user interface experience, what do I want to build and what I want to, and I was always leaning towards trying to integrate Grape.js, and I did that on a couple of tests. I kind of got it kind of working, and just to kind of think about how I want to then kind of build that out from a data perspective. But I decided, I don't even. I've been looking also at all of these visual no-code tools. They all kind of work the same. They're basically just like web-based visual editors where you have like your toolboxes. You drag out components from your toolboxes and to start to arrange the interface just like you would maybe in like any like Illustrator, Photoshop, or design tools that we're all kind of familiar with. I was thinking,
Yeah.
well, what if we could do something different? Where what I wanted to be is I wanted to like go into have like a canvas where I could start dividing up the canvas in like a grid like structure. Thinking about, because I've been doing a lot of work with like CSS Grid and Flexbox, and thinking about if I could then basically design like a visual editing system for that, for that system, and just be able to kind of click around in the interface and just start to kind of slice up in like a grid fashion to start to kind of to defining what the layout is.
So instead of injecting shapes or boxes into it, instead take like I know I've seen this mechanic in different games where it's like you're supposed to divide something into quadrants or something to get rid of a space. But instead be like, no, this is a dividing line. This is a dividing line.
So my idea about it, and this is what I'm working on right now, is like if I hover over, let's say if my cursor is over to more of the left side or the right side, it would know which side based on percentages it's on, and then basically divide that up vertically or horizontally based on the axis where the cursor is at. So think about if you have like a grid of just a 2x2 grid, a grid of 4 squares. If your cursor could just kind of navigate to like the corners, it could know if do you want to create like a horizontal or like a vertical slice, and then just divide that towards the center. Like start the grid structure that way, and then start to kind of build out. Because I was thinking, like, how do I really build pages? And when I think about from a web design perspective, I just started thinking, what is that base structure that the page has? If I'm going to have like a column or a row style layout, what is that base structure, and then kind of start to define what those rows and columns are on laid out on the page. So I know it's really tough to kind of describe. It's more kind of visual.
Yeah, but
it's
kind of
demonstrate it.
Like I find it really interesting because you're saying instead of thinking in terms of, well, I'm going to put a box someplace, you're almost saying, no, you need to fill all the space, which is the truth.
Yeah.
Right. But you're saying you need to come at it from a standpoint of this is the canvas, like you said, and now everything there's space everywhere. So just divide it up, which is, I don't know, it seems like a novel way to look at it.
So then once you have like a base grid or base wireframe to work from, then it has some tools. Let's say if you clicked in one of those, like say around the center of one of those kind of those cells of the areas, it would then basically have like a pop-up saying, oh, do you want to add like a text block or an image or, another type of component in a sense. But I wanted to get away from this whole kind of drag and drop, which it's pretty cool, but all these no code visual editors do that. Where they basically have like toolboxes with components. They basically just drag on the page and push it. And it works. And it is a great experience. But if you want to do something a little bit different, I would just think about how would I, when I go about building websites and web pages just with pure HTML and CSS, how do I approach that from that perspective? I'm not dragging components, but I'm defining just basically the grid structure that I'm using on the page just with HTML and CSS. And then I start and develop the design from there. So why can't I have a visual tool that will do the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, to me, that sounds really interesting because it's like I don't do that type of design. But when I dabble in stuff like that, it is this whole, okay, I want to put this here, but what am I doing with the rest of it? And you're kind of like, well, I got to fill it with something. But if you start with that, well, how are you going to divide and structure the layout? How are you going to build that? I mean, it's not a framework, but like that structure. And then, okay, now let's talk about what fills it. What does this content look like? But instead of getting so focused on, oh, I want a sidebar here that looks like this, and then it's like, well, what's going to go here? I'm not quite sure yet. Just really, really make sure you start with knowing here's where things are in the page. No, it's really interesting.
Yeah,
Really interesting.
it's kind of basically doing like a visual wireframe, because that's what I've been, that's why I really try to enforce to my students, before going and really focusing on that final design, which you may have in your head, what that's going to look like, but just start with the structure. Define the structure, which is a basic wireframe with lines, boxes. Just know what the structure is. Then you can then kind of really dial into those specific areas once you start to kind of build out the design first.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's so I've been actually making some progress on that. That's what I've been doing this week and kind of hacking away on that, primarily with React with Next.js. That's been the kind of platform I'm using with that, because just I'm a React guy. I did take a look at Vue. And I was like, oh yes, it feels a little bit like Angular to me, and I kind of had some experience with that. So I was like, oh, but it's a whole other system, and I was like, oh, I don't know, I can't do that right now.
So here's how I've heard it described. Maybe you described it this way. No, I don't think it was you, but I've heard it described whereas as React's very much a frame. Maybe it was you. Is React very much a framework, and you have to do it that way, versus Vue is more like we describe how to do stuff. You can you can drop us anywhere. You don't have to rethink everything. You just put us on a page. That's fine. Versus React's like, there's some structure that I need, and you need to do it this way.
Well, it's not like well, if you define it with if you're working with a system like more of a framework like Next.js, or Vue has their what is their framework? Their framework called? It's like because I took a look at that too. There's like a Nuxt. It's like Nuxt. I think that's their framework. They have frameworks defined where, like, yes, if you want to have a good structure to follow, a good pattern saying, so if you want to start up an application or website, this is the folder structure you should use. This is how the routes are going to be defined.
You don't have to. You can just create a component and be like, I can inject this in my current terrible layout.
And with React, you can also do some of that too. So if you want to embed React into any website, any page, you could just bring in the libraries and start to work it from a client-side perspective. You absolutely can. But once you start building out full React applications, it does basically you're kind of encouraged to basically build it specific ways, because just the way that the libraries work together. And Vue, from what I looked at it, like I said, is a little bit more pluggable. Angular is also very opinionated in how you need to structure your applications. It's super, super opinionated, which that's why, enterprises or big businesses like it, because it gives like a defined system that forces all the developers to kind of follow.
You say it, I'm just like, it's still around? I didn't realize Angular was still around.
No, just Google keeps supporting it. Google hasn't killed it yet. I know they like to kill their products, but yeah, it's still one of the more popular JavaScript frameworks to use. So yeah, that's what been, and like I said, getting back to Vim and Tim, it's just been so, like, I'm in my happy place. I'm just coding away. My fingers are moving across the keyboard. I'm not touching the mouse anymore. It's just, and then when I need to have a web browser, which I do need to have a web browser to preview my applications I'm working on, I can just Alt Tab or just bring them into Vue, make it go away, and it's just it's so smooth. And I also forgot the joy of Tmux. I mean, have you really used Tmux?
Oh my! If I use Tmux?
Yeah.
No. I just feel like this is going to be a new show. This is a new podcast. It's with Mark. It's the joy of Tmux, where he just goes through all. And
I forgot the joy of basically if I work on multiple projects, switching between projects from a context standpoint, I was always challenging. And I forgot when I have a Tmux environment set up, I could have like a window for each project, and then within that window, I could have certain window panes defined. So if I want to have like one project to have like a 2-column, and then have like a one row at the bottom to kind of like.
I mean, I've used Tmux before, but yeah.
So I could define basically the layout for that project, the visual layout of the editor that I'm how I'm going to be editing the project, but then be able to switch between projects by having the different window, the tab kind of window interface that it has. So I just forgot about just the joy that it brings, the development experience, Tim. And like I said, you're kind of missing out.
I'm not sure I'm missing out, because I can do all of that in an IDE, but
And I still, like I said, I didn't delete all of my, I didn't go back to Linux, even though going through this whole experience, I did. Yeah. It was super tempting, but I was like, no, I've done that too many times.
Does it still feel a little slower running in the Windows?
Yeah, it would definitely be Windows Terminal. I'm super impressed with Windows Terminal. It's definitely has gotten better. And then
is Windows Terminal different than PowerShell? PowerShell is the Windows CLI. You're talking about Windows Terminal, which gets you to WSL.
Yes, well, you have like the Windows Terminal basically can allow you to bring up different shells. So you have the PowerShell You could bring up or just the command prompt, or if
Mhm.
you have like Ubuntu or one of the WSL distributions that you can install on Windows, it brings them up through the Windows terminal. And Windows terminal's gotten pretty good. And also, one was surprised about just like the copy and pasting. So if I, let's say, want to copy and paste something from Stack Overflow, or like had to paste it back and go, there's always was kind of clunky pasting that into a terminal session, but that's actually gotten really good. Now, sometimes when I try to copy text from Windows Terminal or inside of Vim and then to paste it into someplace else, then just getting that copy, that can maybe take a couple tries. And I'm not sure if I'm not doing it right or having the sequence right with that. Like sometimes when I try to do the Vim yank and try to make it a copy, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I have to select the text with the cursor and right click to copy it. And so copy and pasting sometimes is a little flaky, but just the formatting of the text when you paste it into the terminal session, it has the indenting, all the spacing.
Nice.
It all kind of just works. So I remember in the past that was also a real big thing. Was if I copy paste text in terminal session, I have to go through to clean it up or reformat it.
Oh,
And
right.
that was just a big pain.
Yeah. My struggle with copy paste is, for those of you who know my setup, I run, well, it's unlike Mark, who's trying to run Windows and Linux together. I run Windows on a Windows machine and Linux on a Linux machine, and I use Synergy to move my mouse and keyboard between both of them. And sometimes the copy paste, they do a pretty good job. I'm pretty impressed. Like any text usually I can copy from either direction, right? From the Windows machine to Linux or Linux to Windows. From Linux to Windows, I can usually copy images, which to me is kind of fascinating that it's able to take whatever the binary data is in the clipboard and then translate it to it. I don't think it goes the other way too well. And then maybe it's just because I'm on an old version. I don't know, but I've been impressed with that. But yeah, I feel the whole, sometimes you go to paste and you're like, that's not even what I meant to copy because somehow the clipboard didn't update on the other system. Yep. So you're liking the
So far, we'll
new
see.
dev tooling life. We'll see.
When
I
the
will say
summer
about every 6 months, I feel like you reinvent your.
when the summer hits, I may just go all the way back to Linux, but I'm not doing that now. I'm still teaching because this is the one thing I found about Linux.
It's the video drivers, right?
It's the video and audio are super flaky on Linux.
Yeah.
And I wish that would get fixed because other than that, I loved it. And it was
I hesitate. Like I want to do Zoom on my Linux box for a couple reasons. One, because then I can actually screen share using their tooling. Right now I have to screen share by like telling Zoom, share from a second camera. So it'll actually understand that my video is going to be the content of what I'm trying to share. Because when you just do it, Zoom's like, it's just a person's face. Who cares if it's high res? And when it's text, it's like frustrating to everybody. So I want to do that, but I'm concerned because exactly what you're saying. Most of the time I hear, sometimes it takes you to the wrong breakout room, doesn't quite know where to go. I have issues getting the audio to work. So yeah, I'm kind of spoiled in the fact that I use Windows for all of that side of things. Any type of video communication and audio, I use the Windows box for, and Linux is just my dev system. So if I was trying to do it all in one, I wonder what frustration I'd have. But yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely, maybe if you had like, say there's all these mini Chromebooks, you could definitely kind of blow one Chromebook away and kind of put Linux on top of it and kind of do a little kind of test of your development environment.
I feel like Chromebook,
if it can support Linux, it, I don't know.
Is not the best test because especially these Chromebooks, which are a bit old, I'll say. So yeah.
But like I said, I probably during summertime I'm going to be tempted to go back to it. Once I don't have to do too many Zooms, but yeah, once I would run Zoom for all my classes on Linux, it would crash on me left and right.
But you were using OSB too, right? Or OBS?
Yes. And OBS, it's interesting too. OBS, since it's a great open source product, I thought it would work great on Linux. It does work well on Linux, but it doesn't. It seems just smoother on Windows too. Like it's weird how some of these products that are developed for larger, let's say. Not to say, well, I guess larger platforms with more users on it because there's more users of Windows than there is Linux.
Right.
Seems to be they're just better supported. Even like Audacity, finding my default audio driver or the audio source doesn't switch that. Occasionally that would switch that on Linux too. So a lot of these open source products do work better on Windows too, which is weird.
Well, but I think maybe what you're hinting at, and this may be wrong, I don't know because I've not dug into it, but I wonder if the truth is really the SDKs and the integration points for media on Windows are more refined than what they are on Linux.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, like they have to be, how frustrating, like they have to be because Windows wants to be your gaming and your media center, right? So if every time you launch the thing and it's like, oh, you're not even using the right audio again when I drop into this game, that's going to be super frustrating. And I know that happens, I'm sure, on Windows at some point in time, but I think there's a lot of user pressure to make sure that those AV functions in Windows are consistent, and they probably do have a lot of good SDKs or API or whatever, however you're integrating with the operating system, to make that super easy. Is my guess. Could be completely wrong, but that's my guess. So
Yeah.
anyway, you know what happened last week, Mark? 2 weeks ago.
I don't remember anything about it. A week ago, Tim.
You don't even. Yeah.
Very,
Well, we
very,
didn't do a show.
very minimal short-term memory.
We didn't do a show a week ago. We did a show 2 weeks ago, and some of you might remember it was a show that was not at all sponsored by PHP Tech. At all.
That's right. Now I remember. Yeah.
But in the after show, so we went a little bit long, and those that watched the live broadcast see that sometimes me and Mark talk a little bit after the show, and we did. And we talked a little bit about the importance of conferences or getting to a conference, the community, and that in your career and the progression of your career, right? And one of our listeners clipped that video and shared it on Twitter, like the after show. I was like, we do an entire hour show, and this is what they grab. Is
well,
the
like I
stuff
said, I start making sense at the end of the show.
Is that what it is?
This is when I finally wake up, because we are doing the show in the morning. It takes me about like an hour to wake up.
That is true. So I thought it might be worthwhile to talk a little bit about that, because to kind of resume that conversation, because you were talking about the interest of, if I'm looking, sorry, Mark's coworkers, I know you have to find this out here, but if you're looking to get back into a development career, right, instead of higher ed. You're thinking that, maybe I should go to some conferences to connect with people, or to
probably would be a smart move. Yeah.
And the thing that came to my mind is I'm doing, and this is not, I mean, it's going to sound like shameless self-promotion, but it's just a context, right? I'm going to do the keynote at PHP Tech. And part of that is to weave in a little bit of the impact that tech has had on my career. But I also have to give the content that I'm going to give in the keynote, which is to kind of talk about our mindset and how we view our code, how we view our community, how we view our career, and asking if, like, shifting our perspective on that a little bit might make it easier for us to accomplish what we want to accomplish, and encouraging devs to kind of think about that the way sometimes they think about the way they model the rest of life in our code. So I got, that's the main content, but I'm gonna try to weave in a little bit of my how PHP Tech is an impact on my career. That kind of relates and is an illustration of some of the higher level thoughts that I hope to bring out there.
So how long has PHP Tech been around for?
Oh man, I don't even know. I first went in 20, and this is some of the story that I'll tell, right? And but as I look at the content, it's like I can't tell the whole story, and I think it might be useful for some devs, because when I talk about it, it's like, and we've talked about this before, right? It's the social media view of life. When you hear someone's story, at least that little bit and piece, or the highlight reel of it, right? And you're like, oh, but that's not going to ever happen for me, because it looks in that view perfect, or it looks like something that's unattainable, because we take the perfect Instagram photo and it doesn't show you what the rest of life is, but it gives you this perspective of like, oh, life for them must be perfect, and there's no way that that's attainable for me, right? Like, because we see that, right?
See that? Well, that is interesting. That's a good, interesting perspective, because you go either way with that. I never had that issue of, like, my issue was like, oh, I could say, oh yeah, of course I could do that, but then it never actually works out that way.
But so for me to tell the story is I'm going to talk about, like, I don't even remember how many years it was around. My first PHP Tech, I think, I want to say it was 2012. And it was the longest running PHP conference to that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I forget how long it had been around. I'm sure someone could chime in, and probably in the comments, if we had comments, and tell us, but we don't have comments, so we're not going to know. But it's been around for quite a while. And the way I got there is I actually ran into one of the organizers at a different event, and I met Keith. I was actually flown out to San Francisco for a VIP weekend, and that sounds all fancy and stuff, but it was just like Twilio wanted to get together a bunch of the devs that were writing for them to show them a new product. And I'm pretty sure whatever NDA I signed doesn't matter anymore. The product they showed us was their browser-based client. And nobody else had seen it. They wanted us there to take a look at it and to play with it and to kind of put it through its paces and see what we thought about it before it was generally available. And while we were there, they brought some of us that had given them feedback on their language specific SDKs. They're like, hey, let's go talk and have this one breakout group because you've all given us feedback and we want to show you what we're planning for our SDKs. And does it make sense to you? And I had some feedback on what they're doing on the PHP library, and I referenced some other frameworks like Zen framework and things like that. And that piqued Keith's interest because he's like, oh, this guy's talking about PHP, he's talking about the Zen framework. It's probably a PHP developer. Maybe I should talk to him. And so Keith comes to me and he's like, that was really interesting. Your feedback. There's a conference in Chicago in a couple months. You should go there. And I was like, PHP Tech. All right. Conference in Chicago. So to tell the story, if I tell, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like if I start telling that story, there may be some younger devs out there like, you're getting flown out to companies' headquarters to play with their product. I mean, yeah, who gets to do that? No one gets to do that. But I want to actually pull back the curtain a little bit because that sounds fancy. But at the time, I'm a young developer, contract developer. I'm not making much, right? Because when Keith tells me about this PHP Tech thing, I look it up. I'm like, I can't justify paying that much for a ticket. And I can't justify a flight out there.
Yep.
And then I have to pay for a hotel. There's
That's
zero
right.
way that I can go to this conference.
It's not cheap.
What in the world? Because the only reason I'm in San Francisco at Twilio's offices, I'll tell you, is because they flew me out there. And then you can say, well, but you must be really important because they flew it. Let's talk a little bit about that. They flew me out there because I had an active voice in their community in that they had decided they wanted to start running these developer contests where they'd say, hey, here's the theme for this week or month, or I forget. I think maybe they did bi-weekly. I forget what the actual time was. They throw it out there and they'd be like, write some code related to this theme and show it off. Now, why did they set up a developer contest? Because they wanted something to talk about. They wanted to be able to highlight someone building something interesting and novel on their API. And I'd submit every week or every time. And I'd be like, maybe I'll win this time. Maybe. And get this, a couple of them I won. I had a couple netbooks that were sent to me because I won. And you'd be like, well, you might be a developer because how could I win that contest? It's easier than you think because when I was on the other side of that equation, let me tell you, I bet there were weeks that it was me and maybe one other dev that submitted. So the chances of me winning were pretty high. You don't have to somehow be known or recognized. You just have to want to have a part in a community or want to participate, or you see something like, hey, I'll write some code for that. I'll throw my hat into the ring. And that's all it was. I wasn't some great developer. I was just the one that said, sure, I think this API is cool. Let me try writing some code to win this contest. Oh, wow, I won it. How did I win it? Maybe I was the only submission. Maybe that's how I won it. And that gets at least noticed. And then they're like, well, we should bring around a couple of these devs that are doing stuff and they're building and on our platform, and we should show them this product before it goes live. And they've been engaging with us and telling us, hey, I use your product, but I think this could be better. So whenever you're thinking to yourself, should I write that GitHub issue and say, hey, what if it did it this way? What if it did that? Should I engage with this? Yes, you should, because it may end up with you being the developer who couldn't afford to fly out to San Francisco. No way I could ever do that. Having companies say, you know what, let's come out here and let's show you what we're working on. That leads to a conversation with Keith. Keith's like, you should go to this conference in Chicago. And I was like, that sounds really cool. Then I was like, there's no way I can do that. I can't afford that. But I looked and I saw, oh, you know what? PHP Architect not only runs a conference every year in Chicago at that time, but they were doing kind of an in-city conference where their goal was, and I'm so glad that they did this, was let us take the conference to the people. And they did, I think it was for 2 years, they ran a couple conferences in a bunch of different cities, and there was one that was near me. I think one year they did it in Baltimore, and at Baltimore I can drive to, right? That's close enough.
Not too far away. Yeah.
So I drove down there, went to this one-day conference, met some people, and then I think another year they did it in Philly. And so I drove down to Philly, met some people. And then it's like, all right, I want to get to this conference. How am I going to do that? Because I can't figure out how to pay for that ticket. And not just the ticket. I can't figure out how to pay for the travel. I can't figure out how to pay for the hotel. So I had a client I had a client that wanted me to write some example code for their API. Now, why did they pick me? Because they saw that I was writing code for telephony related APIs, and they're like, okay, so this guy should
Did
be able
they?
to.
Where did they actually? That's an interesting point. Where did they
Yeah,
actually find you? Was
Odesk.
it because you? Oh, because you were working through. Okay, because you were just they were seeing the projects you were
And
working on
honestly,
Odesk.
I don't know if I don't remember exactly if they reached out to me or I reached out to them. And I don't know if it was because they had seen that I was doing stuff with Twilio, and it's like, okay, this guy knows these telephony APIs. We're a
Mhm.
telephony API. Maybe he could build something on us. He at least understands how the others work. And so I built some code. It was interesting because it was an API that at the time didn't even work in the US. It was completely international and hadn't broken in the States yet.
Mhm.
So I was writing code and like emailing somebody and be like, hey, test this. See if it works. I think this works, but I can't test it. Can you tell me if it works? Or I think I just called you, stuff like that, right?
So,
Because I
so do
couldn't
you,
test it.
so do you find that a lot of developers, maybe that you have interacted with, has this kind of a feeling of like of like why try, why do?
I don't know that it's a feeling of why try or why do. I think it's a feeling of I see the end result
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know even how that was possible to get there.
Oh, okay.
And the truth is, it's not the end result is just, well, to some extent, the end result isn't an end result. It's just where somebody happens to be right now. And the way they got there was probably just by continually trying to find and take advantage of the opportunities that were in front of them.
And this kind of goes in line with something I was thinking about this week too. Have you ever gone through a point of your life where you had imposter syndrome?
I think from a developer's
Yeah, from a developer
perspective,
standpoint. Yeah.
I think that's just it's common to the point that I don't know that anybody legit would be able to say they don't, because I think all the time we look and say this job is more than I can figure out, and I don't feel like I understand how to do this, or I see my code from the past and I see how broken that is, and instead of recognizing that as a sign of growth,
Mm-hmm.
we look at it and say, well, that must mean I'm not good at this because I wrote that in the past.
See, it's interesting. There was only one point in my life where I could really track back to when I had a real bad case of that. Was back when I
Yeah.
first started teaching, when I was in college, and I started to be around other professors who had graduate degrees and were doing this for many years. I remember, yeah, that really did affect me. But from a professionally outside of teaching academically, I've had the opposite problem. Or like I'm not afraid to do anything or afraid to get into anything, which actually that could get me into trouble. Could start doing some probably projects or work that maybe I probably should have maybe slowed down a little bit there. But it was interesting too, thinking about these people who do have that issue, just normally with like getting into development or becoming programmers and feeling like they can't do it or they're afraid to do it because they see other developers who are doing it all the time or being professional, submitting code on GitHub and patches and be able to make a lot of progress from their kind of career and their kind of their knowledge base, what they know about coding and developing. And then that may just seeing that they start to build this kind of very negative kind of ideas in their head, and then they're not able to actually progress or make any progress in their own life.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why I wanted to share like more of the story than I'll be able to share, I think, in the keynote, is because if I talk about like, yeah, so I get flown out to San Francisco, I meet Keith, and then I'm like, I want to get to PHP Tech. That sounds like a thing that's like, well, how does that even happen to a normal person? And I'm saying it does. It does, because at that point, now, what is it happening today? Our company's still running developer contests the same way Twilio was back in the early days of DevRel. Maybe, maybe not. But do companies still desperately want developers that use their product when it's a developer product to engage with them and talk to them? Yes, they do. And once you do that, will you become kind of an inner circle where they'll share more things with you and that will lead to better connections? Yeah, I think that still works exactly the same way. It may not be the same, the story may not have the same characters in it, but it's the same theme, right? Because I talked to this other client who's a different API. I start working with them, and for those of you who know my history, that's Nexmo, right? There's like 4 employees there at the time. They're trying to break into the SMS and the voice market on a global standpoint. And I'm like, you know what you guys need? You need somebody in developer relations, because you are building a developer product. You're asking me to create sample code so you can put it on your site and say, this is how you use your API. You don't need me to create sample code. You need me to be your developer evangelist. And why did I say that? Why was I interested in that? A couple reasons. One, because I'm decent at standing in front of people and telling them how to do something or showing them or communicating an idea. And I kind of wanted to exercise that muscle a little bit more and get better and refine that. But the other reason is, where developer evangelists go, Mark?
Conferences.
They go to conferences.
They speak at conferences. That's
So
their job.
I convinced Nexmo
Yeah.
to take me on as the first part-time developer evangelist and only developer evangelist for quite some time. And you know what I did the next month? So there's this conference in Chicago, guys. You should probably sponsor it.
There you go.
And
well, I think
that is how I got to.
Well, that is the best way to go to conferences. So if you do work for a company that is financially viable, that does have some money to support their employees and to want to promote the education of their employees, then yeah, they'll be happy to send the developers to developer conferences. That was how I got to conferences. When my first job out of college, working for a tax administrator, they used a software platform called Progress Software. I don't know if you ever heard of that before, but it's a very kind of business centric, sort of like it felt kind of like Visual Basic in a way, the language standpoint, but is a language based around a database, their own Progress database. And so they're based out in Massachusetts near Boston. And that's where the company, and they held a developer conference every year. And every year I worked in a development department of probably about 6 to 8 developers. Our company would send, I think, around 2 to 3 developers, and we'd take turns going. And so for the 5 years I worked, I think I went there twice. So that was my first experience going to a developer conference, and the company paid for it. They paid everything, your food. And if you had some expensive food that they didn't pay for, you just give them receipts. They give you money back. And it was a really great experience. And then, the next developer conference I went to the first Google I/O, Tim.
Really?
Yeah. So when I worked at
for those who don't know what Google I/O is, Google I/O is not the conference that you want to get to now, and you're like, oh, but I can't afford it. Google I/O is the conference that you can afford, want to go to, and you can't because the ticket's sold out before you can refresh.
Or now it's so. I think they probably started this because after the pandemic, because they went primarily virtual. Now it's so exclusive. You can't get into it. They even say limited. Because I checked it out because it's coming up in May, like early May. So I was like, I'm just curious. I was like, what's going on with that? I actually got an email from Google saying, oh, check out our Google I/O this year, something like that. So I went to the page and I said, like, there's no place to buy a ticket on the page. You could just register for virtual. Ticket to see the sessions, and then if you got to dig in farther, saying yes, this is where the event's gonna be placed at in California, and we're gonna have very limited seating at this event, but it's gonna be broadcasted virtually for everyone. But I went to the first Google I/O, and this was before they were giving away phones. I was like, and it was interesting too.
Yeah,
it was a cool experience. They had
okay. Let me just correct my understanding if it's wrong, because you're more connected to that ecosystem than I am in terms of mobile development. But was it pretty much, if you got a ticket to I/O, you got some piece of hardware
the next year after? Yeah. Okay. So it was like, I guess when for a series of, I don't know when they stopped doing that. I think maybe because I had the first Google I/O, and I'm looking at the date, so it was so long ago. It was 2008. That's when I went, and then that was at the Moscone Center. So 2008,
I did conferences in the Moscone Center. Yeah.
So to 2015, that's when they had the Moscone. Then they moved it to their amphitheater, where if you look on YouTube and type in Google I/O and see the video, you'll probably see them at this amphitheater, kind of this outdoor amphitheater that they have the conference at now, which I was never been there. But I remember like the years that they're at the Moscone Center. Yes, they were giving away Android phones, like the next version of the Android phone. They were giving that away to all the developers, but they didn't do that the first year that I went. But I got there because I worked for a telecommunications company in Philadelphia, and based on the platforms I was using, I had a lot of freedom in the platforms I could pick for when I was managing their web applications there. And I suggested to the president of the company, oh, there's this conference, Google's doing their first developer conference. Would you send me there? And they had to talk to him about it a little bit and talk about how what I would be going there for and what I'm hoping to do after we get back. So I had to sell them a little bit, but they fit the bill then, sent me out there.
That's great. And like, so either find that, and that to me is the best, because my solution was kind of I'm a contractor, right? I don't have a company that'll pay my way there. So my solution was like, let's be a contractor who also does DevRel. And I got there, but unfortunately I spent most of my time behind a booth. And not unfortunately, because guess what? I got to see many people at the conference. So I didn't just go to talks and listen, but I met not everybody, but I met a lot of
Yeah.
the people that were there because they came to my booth, talked to me, got to know them. So I didn't benefit from the content as much as I benefited from the network effect of a community. I like going into the talks when I could, but yeah, much better if you can. Well, two things, right? Two things to learn there. If you can get your company to send you, if not, maybe find a new company, right? But if you can get your company to send you, that's great. But then don't discount the effect of just the people there, right? It's not just the talk content. It's the people that you can meet and the people that because they're working on problems that are either similar to yours or maybe dissimilar to yours in such a way that makes you think of things in a new way. And then you're going to file it away. And a year later, when you're like, oh, we really need someone who knows whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, I ran into somebody at that conference. Let me see if I can find them. They may be able to help us out. So the value of finding your way to get, finding the way to get there, it's worth it. It's worth it, even if it means you have to convince your boss to get there, even if it means you have to make a subtle career change or figure out how to, from my perspective as a contractor, change a little bit of how you're working so you can have the excuse or the opportunity to get there. It's worth doing that because connecting with that community is so key to the future of your career.
And it was a bit daunting, especially if you go by yourself. I remember
Yeah.
that the first time, because the first conference I went with my coworkers. So we kind of had our small little group that we were kind of able to hang out and kind of walk around and talk to people kind of together. When you go by yourself, it is a little bit daunting. I remember that from Google.io, kind of, if you walk up to a booth, that's an easy way to kind of just start conversations, ask questions.
Yeah.
But then if you walk around the hallway or after, in between sessions, that can be a little bit challenging, just kind of if you see some people talking, to kind of eavesdrop and trying to chime in and trying to, introduce yourself. That can be a little bit of a challenge, but it is still a good experience for developers to have. Because once you get over that initial fear of saying, okay, these people are talking over here, I want to see what they're talking about, introduce myself, maybe you can strike a conversation. Once you get used to that, which I think because of the pandemic, I don't think we can communicate with each other anymore, or we're just used to doing it virtually. Then I think that is a great skill for developers to develop themselves, because they need to be able to communicate in person and be able to build relationships. And one thing that I saw that PHP Tech was doing, which I thought was pretty cool and also was a little bit tempting, even though I said, not doing much of PHP.
One more day. The link's up there. QR
and
code.
It is.
Hit the
I
link.
know this is. Okay, this is the.
Oh, and did you know the discount got more? We looked at the discount into last show. It's even more now.
It's definitely a good deal.
It's $100 off of an already early bird discount. Today is the last day you can do it.
I would agree.
I'm telling you, pull the trigger on the ticket today. That's what you want to do. That's what you want to do, Mark. Go ahead.
Is the ad done?
I don't know. Let me look at my. I was supposed to be 30 seconds. I'm supposed to read this content.
Well, one thing I did see by taking a look at the PHP Tech, and also the PHP Tech has a podcast too, which I checked out an episode of their podcast.
PHP Architect does too.
Yeah,
yeah. The magazine.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I because I was curious, and I saw because I saw they had the podcast link on the website. So I checked out their last episode. They were talking about the conference, and one thing they talked about that they're doing, and I saw that also listed on the site too. They do like a game night, like a board game night.
So I think this is. As you're talking about how hard it is when you go by yourself without coworkers to be like, I need to introduce myself to people. I've been at a bunch of different conferences. I've seen the dynamics in different communities. I will tell you that the PHP community is, in my opinion, I know I'm biased because it's the language that I tend to write in, is unique. And then in that, PHP Tech itself is unique in being a conference where everybody there is going to want to help you. In the game, there's social activities every night. People just with board games just sit down. They'll be like, hey, come play with us. There is, if you want to stand off and not interact, you can do it, but they're going to make it difficult. Right? They're going to make it difficult because it's a community that is looking to grow and looking to make people feel welcome. It is, in my opinion, the best developer community you can find is the PHP community.
I'm curious. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's unique to the PHP community compared to?
Don't know. I might have some theories, but I don't know. But it is something, because I could see it at different conferences where it'd be like, well, we're just going to go to our talks and sit here and talk to ourselves, and the PHP community is far more, I don't know, just family.
Well, like I said, I think that's a great idea, especially kind of it gives like an activity, and especially if
Oh,
you
the game night? Yeah,
because
it's
games are
awesome.
a great way
Awesome.
to kind of get introduced because you don't have to know the other person you're playing the game with, and then you learn about each other while you play the game, and it's kind of
Yeah.
that's a great kind of event or platform to use to kind of get to know people.
Those social activities have been some of the highlights of the conference because again, it's not just the talk. The talks are important, but it is meeting people. That plus the content. So it's leveling up on your understanding of the language and improving your craft through either learning new techniques or getting more aware of different concepts. But along with that, it's meeting people that will have an impact not just on your career from a where I work standpoint, but on a career from a like just making you better, because it's not just the conversation, it's not just the one-sided conversation of a talk, it's those conversations with other developers at a table.
Mhm. And assuming they're going to be recording this or live streaming, it, right?
Yes, I believe you can get I do not think it's like just publicly live streamed. There's going to be a paywall.
Because since you are keynoting this and leading this off, and you are the first keynote too. I looked at the schedule. It's not like because usually they have like 2 or 3 keynotes kind of right after each other in these conferences, like the first day.
Oh, well, there's just one keynote, and I think there's a keynote every day. If I'm not mistaken.
Keynote every day. Okay, that's where they're doing it.
And
You're the
there's a closing one.
first day, first keynote, Tim.
Yep.
You're launching this thing.
Yep.
So it's like
better not screw it up.
Yeah. So they better have the stream working good and be able to have the recording. So you want to be able to definitely archive this.
But yeah, I think I don't know if you can get a digital ticket, but you could just buy the ticket and then you can stream it.
You could buy the ticket and stream it? Wait, what?
Yeah, because it's not like it's going to be publicly streamed. So if you're not sure if you want to travel to Chicago, you can buy the ticket and just watch the live streams. I'm just saying.
You could. That is one option. Yeah.
It is the lowest that you'll ever see it today. You can use my discount. If you're like, tell them Tim sent you. Tell them Tim sent you. And you'll get a PHP Tech ticket for, I don't know, what is even the price? Is it going to be like, I don't know, $400 or something like that? I'd have to look. I'd have to follow this.
The early bird price was $600, and then with your code, I think it brings down to $500.
$500? Okay. So that is a decent price.
Yeah.
For the content, I mean, you should just buy it. That's what you should do. You should just buy it. It's pretty easy. It's pretty easy. So, well, what do you think, Mark?
A few minutes left, Tim. Before we start the post show, we're actually, like I said, I'm going to start making sense there.
Somehow I didn't time this content right. But no, I'm excited, and I don't know. I get the feeling sometimes, like I say, from when you hear somebody else's story, you're like, oh, yeah, that could never happen to me. It's like it could. There's nothing. What I want to say, it's like I wasn't a great developer that everybody knew. I was just trying to engage with companies and have conversations with them, and you do that long enough, somebody's going to notice.
And I think you're right about that. I think there's like, for me, maybe I need to be more empathetic and thinking about other developers, how, especially younger developers, how they're coming up and they might be afraid to do things or feel like they can never accomplish what they see other developers accomplishing, like within their career. They don't know how to get there.
Right.
Because like I said, I think from a professional standpoint career, besides the academic stuff, I've never had fear. I've just kind of just dived in, just did it, because then just learned how to learn while, starting something new and just be able to kind of push myself forward. But there are, that is an issue that people deal with, or younger developers deal with in a sense. And I think, you're right. Going to events like this, interacting, trying to, meet people and learn from people and develop relationships, that definitely can help. Or try to also open up doors, like we talked about. Like if you want to look for the next career opportunity, the next job, developing relationships, building that social network of your own, and knowing who you can kind of either get a reference from, or maybe get a lead on a company that may be working in a company or has a relationship with somebody at a company, that definitely can lead to some good things.
No, that's huge. And we look at it from a career standpoint, like knowing those people are going to be helpful, because if for some reason, you're looking for new work, you're looking for a new opportunity, that's exactly the community to go to. You say, hey, do you know anybody? And I'm telling you, the PHP community is great for that. But it's even more than that. Like when you talk about how your career grows, it's just knowing these people. Because that's I think that's where it's coming from too. Like I'll talk about the people that I know in the PHP community, and other devs will be like, that you're talking about the people who write the software, the libraries that we're pulling in and using. And it's like, yeah, but I'm not special because of that. Everybody knows them. You know, it's not like, oh, Tim knows these devs that are writing these libraries. No, I just know of him because I've met him at conference. I've talked to him a little bit. It's not like we're super close, but I don't have any problem reaching out to him because we have a background. We have a conversation, you know, to peg that, to tie that to. And it's not, I mean, anybody can do that. I'm telling you, they're at these conferences. Just go sit down and talk to them. They want to talk to you. It is such an accessible and open community.
And I bet if you go there, you will learn that PHP does not only stand for personal homepage.
Just these subtle digs. You want to know why we're such an open community? It's because we have to deal with people like you. That's why.
I know
That's why.
These strange JavaScript developers. Yeah, I know the JavaScript PHP world. I know.
All right. Well, again, I don't know if I can underscore this enough. It's the last day to get these discount tickets, and we'll see you next Friday.
Well, there you go. It wasn't a full ad, but it was.
Yeah, not full ad.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not paying me for a full ad. They're not paying me for things. So there's that.
But like we talked about, you speaking there gets you to they fit the bill for to get you to the conference.
Yeah, but well, the other thing is, and maybe I should say this there. It's like, no, this isn't an ad, right? But the truth is, like, you should go to this. Like, there's so, I mean, it doesn't have to be an ad. You going to PHP Tech benefits you, and I'm not you, but like in general, but also you, right? Like, people going to PHP Tech benefits the community of which I'm a part of, and I want that to happen because it just makes us better. You know,
I think I asked you this. Why is it always based in Chicago?
It's not. It bounced around for a little bit.
Oh, okay.
It's just been in Chicago. Before it's in Chicago, I think. I may be wrong here. Before it's in Chicago, I think it may have been in Canada. I think there may have been a Tech there first, way, way, way back.
Because
Tech has gone through 3 iterations too of ownership.
Oh yeah, I know.
Like PHP Architect has gone through 3 iterations of ownership, which also kind of is one of the reasons why I look at it as a very community thing. Even though there happens to be 2 guys that own it right now, there was people before them and people before them. It's just it's more of the community than it is whoever happens to be holding, you know, managing it at the current moment. So
from a geographical standpoint, it makes sense because it's, you know, the middle of the country. So whether or not you're on the east or west coast, it's kind of,
and Chicago is a great
both.
international airport too. That's the other thing. It's a great international airport. Like, you can get direct flights to there.
Yeah,
from
that's
around the world.
It's a good point.
So, and I know when I don't know if they're going to bring back PHP World. They did a sibling conference in DC called PHP World. And again, DC, obviously international hub for flights. So you can bring in a lot of different devs. Tech always had the flavor of, we are the community conference.
Okay.
Where it's like, it's just us. It's
not sponsored by one or 2 major companies.
There's no pretense. There's nothing like that. Whereas World tried to build we're going to bring together all the different big names in PHP, like WordPress, Automatic, right? Automatic WordPress. We're going to bring in Laravel. We're going to bring in all the Symfony, all the frameworks. Zen's going to be there, and try to fill that role of a little bit, I don't want to say, but not as community driven, but like, let's talk about the frameworks. Let's talk about
didn't Zen try to do that in the past?
Well, Zen had their conference.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. ZenCon, yeah.
I've been there. They're not having it anymore because they're no longer. I don't know even who owns Zen anymore, honestly. It's gone through a couple owners too. But the one thing too, and I think they're doing this again this year. PHP Tech has always been known for running their Uncon. So if you've never spoken at a conference, you can just go sign up for a slot in the Uncon and give a talk. And that's actually where I gave my first talk.
Oh, what was your first talk about?
It was what became then my first talk at Tech, was my Adventures in Contract Development.
Okay. Yep.
So I talked about contracting back in the Uncon, and then that became the first talk that I gave, which I think I'll highlight in the keynote for a different reason, because that talk was me explaining how I viewed contracting. And what was really interesting is there are people even in the talk that were like, well, have you thought of it this way? And because, you know, I was very much I bill hourly. This is what I'm worth. This is what you're paying me. And there are people doing value-based. With, you know, value-based is like, well, I'm going to charge it what it's value, you know, the value to the company. which works great when you can do that. And when you're working in a context where the company has a very real understanding of the value of what you're doing. But most of my clients were like these startup kind of things and just ideas. And no, so I couldn't. And my point there is I had to model it so it was cohesive, right? My model had to work for the people I was working with and for my context.
It was either that, they're going to give you shares of the company that don't exist.
Right. Right. So, and somebody else could model contracting in a completely different way, and they both can be valid, right? And we can change our model. In fact, I know devs that did value-based, and then when they ran out of companies that had those type of projects, they went back to hourly based because they, you gotta model it in a way that makes sense for the current context you find yourself. And basically, my keynote's going to challenge us to consider the fact that we should do more of that. We should do more of just saying, all right, maybe if I think about this differently, it'll change how I view it, and that may change how I can use it to then be successful. So we'll see.
Yeah. So everything else is good at work. You're over the.
Oh, I definitely have to hit end stream now. So this is the post show, and we're gonna sign this one off right now.
Just